Today you're going to be learning how to use a biological key in order to classify an organism. Spoiler alert, what I'm actually going to do is I'm going to spend the very first part of this video going through the example of an elephant that they gave you in the book. The reason I'm going to go through it on video is because I know that it can be very confusing to try and read the description as you're constantly flipping back and forth and trying to look at the key at the same time. Now, if you were able to read the description and look at the key and figure out exactly what they were doing, what you may want to do is you may want to kind of skip to the end of the video where I'm going to give you some special things to note about some of these steps in case some of them might be confusing to you. So if you just kind of fast forward to the end, I'll be putting some other notes up about some of these other steps. So, but first what I would like for you to do then is if you want me to go through the example of the elephant with you and show you how to document it in your chart so that you'll know exactly what to do for your lab, then keep watching. And you should have your book open in front of you to pages 358 and 359 so that you can see the key as I'm going through it. All right, so if you go ahead, just flip over for a second to page 361 where you can see a sample table there. And the table is what I actually have reproduced up here on the board already, and it's what we're going to be filling in as we go through this key. So the ones that you do for your lab, you're going to have a number over here, number 1, number 2, number 3, but this is the example, and the specimen that we're going to be looking at is the elephant. So we always start with key number 1. So that means that as I'm going through the keys, I'm going to list them over here. So key number 1 is going to be my first one. And the first question there, again, look at the top of page 358. The first question there that we have to answer is it microscopic or is it macroscopic? Now, obviously, we do not need a microscope in order to see an elephant. So therefore, it must be macroscopic, and all macroscopic organisms fall into domain Eukarya. And so you can see there in the red ink that they tell us that a microscopic creature is going to be in domain Eukarya. So I can go ahead and I can fill that in over here because that's the first piece that I already know. Then as you slide your way across the table, you can see that anything that is macroscopic and in domain Eukarya is going to direct us to go to key number 3. To go down to key number 3 then, the next question is it autotrophic or is it heterotrophic? Elephants do not have chlorophyll. They do not make their own food. They do have to eat. And so therefore that tells us that an elephant is going to be heterotrophic. So I just used key 3 there to determine that this is heterotrophic, and then that is then going to send me down to key 5. So I'll put a 5 up here, and then we'll down to key 5. Key 5 says, is it a decomposer or is it a consumer? A decomposer is something like a fungus that's going to take dead things and it's going to break them down and return those things back to the soil. Elephants don't do that. And so definitely this is going to be a consumer, and key 5 tells us that if it's a consumer, that's going to put it into kingdom Animalia. So that means that I can go here, I can put Animalia here next to the K for kingdom. And then if it's in kingdom Animalia, it tells me that the next place I need to go in the key is to key number 6. So I'm going to write that over here. Key number 6 says, is it lacking a backbone or does it have a backbone? Now, anything, basically, if you know that a creature is going to have bones, then it's going to have a backbone. An elephant is going to have bones. Anything that's going to be very large like that is going to have a skeletal structure because that's the only way that you can support something that's going to be a very large creature, a very large organism like that. It can't be very large at all. And be able to not have a skeletal structure within it for support. So it's going to have a backbone, and so that is going to put it into phylum Chordata. So I can put phylum Chordata down here, and then it tells me I'm going to jump all the way down to key 22. So if you thought you were going to be going in order for all of these, that's not correct. You're not going to go in order. You've got to go to whichever key that it tells you you're going to be using next. So now we'll go down to key 22. Key 22 is over on the second page of this biological key. So key 22 says, does it have jaws or a beak, or does it lack jaws or a beak? Anything that can chew is going to have jaws, because you've got to have that hinged motion and the muscles available in the jaw to be able to chew something up. So elephants, since they are going to be eating grasses and hay, they are going to have jaws. And so that's going to take us to key 23. So when I look at key 23, it says, does it have skin covered with scales, or does it lack scales? We think of scales. Fish have scales, snakes have scales, elephants do not have scales. So scales, it's going to lack scales. So that tells us then that we're going to need to go to key 26. So we'll go to 26. 26 says, does it have slimy skin, no scales, no hair, no feathers? Well, we know that it certainly does not have slimy skin. It doesn't have feathers. We already determined it didn't have any scales. The second question there said, does it have feathers or hair? And while it doesn't have feathers, it does have hair. And so that is going to send us to key 28. May not notice a lot of hair on an elephant, but it does have some hair. So class 28 said, does it have feathers or does it have hair? So same question, they've just kind of subdivided it. It does have hair, so that's going to put it into class Mammalia. You probably talked about mammals before. And so class Mammalia then is going to send us to key 29. When I go down to key 29, it wants to know if it has hooves. Well, what kinds of animals do have hooves? Horses have hooves, you know, they're hard. Cows have hooves. Pigs have hooves. Elephants do not have hooves. So since it lacks hooves, that is going to send us to key 31. Key 31 says, is it a carnivore or an herbivore? Well, you should know those words now. A carnivore is something that's going to eat meat. An herbivore is going to eat plants. An elephant is definitely an herbivore, so that's going to send us to key 33. So when we go down to key 33, it says, does it have enlarged front teeth for gnawing? And when you think about enlarged front teeth, elephants have tusks, but those are not teeth. They don't use those for chewing. And when you think of enlarged front teeth for gnawing, you're going to think of something like a beaver that is going to have big front teeth that is going to gnaw trees down. Big front teeth like that. And so since it does not have enlarged front teeth for gnawing, that is going to send us to key 35. Key 35 says, it gives us two options. Does it have an enlarged trunk, or does it tend to stand erect on two hind limbs? Now, if you've ever been to a circus, you may have seen an elephant, encouraged to stand up on its hind legs by its trainer, but elephants do not normally do that. We're looking at normal behavior of these creatures, not something that has been trained into them for a circus. And so the correct answer here is going to be yes, it definitely has an enlarged trunk. It uses that trunk to pick up things. It uses its trunk to breathe. And so that is going to put it in order Proboscidea. Proboscidea. All right, so the process then that we just went through here shows you that as you go through the keys, you went from key 1 to 3 to 5 to 6 to 22. So you're going to list these in order so that you can see which keys you used. As you go through them, you're going to write down domain, kingdom, phylum, class, and order. This key will not take you any further down than the order. And on some of the examples that you do in your lab, you're not even going to get down this far. You may only get to a domain or a kingdom. You may not be able to get any further than that. That's okay. The reason you need to write all these keys down is because when you go through and check your answers, which is in the instructions, make sure you read the instructions carefully, because when you get to the end of that, you should be checking your answers to be sure that they're right. If they're not right, then you're going to be able to look at the keys and say, okay, where did I make my mistake? And this is going to help you to check your answer and to see where the mistake was in your reasoning as you were trying to classify the creatures. Okay, let's look at a couple of things to note. First thing that I mentioned when we first started going through is that you are going to know the domain for every single animal. The key may not tell you what the domain is, but if you end up in archaea or bacteria, you're going to know that that's the domain. If you end up in kingdom Protista, you know that that's domain Eukarya. We put that all on the table that we did yesterday. So make sure that you put the domain down for all of them. Don't ever leave that blank because you know the domain for all of them. Okay, step number 4 talks about whether it has leaves with parallel veins or leaves with netted veins. And this is going to be one that you're going to be using as you're classifying a couple of the plants. And so if you have, this is key 2. So key 2 says parallel veins. Parallel veins is just what it sounds like. The veins in the leaf are going to run parallel to each other. If they're netted veins, they're going to kind of look like this. So that's what a netted vein is going to look like. Parallel is just exactly what it sounds like, okay? We'll talk more about parallel veins and netted veins when we talk about plants, but you can still see this enough to classify something right now. If you look at step 6, having a backbone, lacking a backbone. As I, again, mentioned when we were going through the elephant, if the creature is very large at all, it's going to have a skeletal structure because otherwise it can't stand on its own. So the backbone, if you know that a creature has bones, then it's going to have a backbone also. If you look at key number 7 asks, can the organism be externally divided into equal halves, but it has no distinguishable right and left sides? That is going to be something that has a shape like a football. So if I have a football here, a football is something that I can divide in half, but I don't have to divide it a certain way to divide it in half. I could divide a football in half this way, or I could divide a football in half this way. So I don't really have a specific way that it has to be divided in half. It could be divided a couple of different ways. On the other hand, if you have a person, that's a really bad person, I know. This is not art class, this is biology class, and I'm not trying to do any kind of microscope drawings right now. So just to prove my point here, if I have a person, I can take my person and I can divide the person in half this way, but I can't divide it in half this way because my two halves wouldn't be the same. Because up here I'd have a head and up here and down here I'd have feet. So with a person, you can only divide it one way and have halves that look like mirror images of each other. A lizard would be that way, an elephant would be that way. Most of the mammals that you know are going to be that way. And so that's what it's talking about in key number 7, where it says, can you divide it into right and left sides that are mirror images of each other, or divide it into 2 equal halves? Or can you divide it, but there's really no distinguishing between the 2 halves, between, I could divide it more than one direction. So that's what that one is talking about. If you look at key 9, it's talking about protective external plates. Now, we're not talking about something like a knight in shining armor who has protective armor on the outside. What we're thinking about there is something that's going to have an exoskeleton. You've probably talked in your earlier years about insects, and you know that they have exoskeletons where the thing that provides their structure is actually on the outside of their body. So when you read protective external plates, think exoskeleton when you're reading that one. Finally, the last one I wanted to make a note of was key 17, where it asks about transparent wings or non-transparent wings. Wings that are transparent are wings that you're going to be able to see through. So if you think of a housefly, A housefly has wings that basically you can see through them. Whereas a butterfly is going to have wings that you cannot see through. So that's going to be the difference between transparent and not transparent. The other ones I think are pretty self-explanatory. Those I wanted to make a special note of just because it may be something that you maybe hadn't thought of in that particular way before. So as you go through experiment 9.1, you're going to keep a table exactly like this one. So when you are ready to start the lab itself, you may already have this in your notebook, and if you do, that's fine. So we're just gonna draw a line. Number 1 is a butterfly, and so then you will start at key number 1 and start answering all those questions and working your way through the key for the butterfly, as well as for all of the different creatures that are there, all the way up through number 15. Make sure you check your answers when you're finished. Fix them if they're wrong before you send me your lab. Okay? If you have any questions, email me and let me know. Thanks.